What's going on, everybody? This is College Football Red Zone coming to you with another edition of the 2025 preseason deep dive series where we go into really one of the more chaotic conferences in all of college football. A conference that I am a little bit more personally known and personally affiliated with as a fan of one of these Big 12 teams from a personal standpoint. So it's going to be really fun to be able to really take a look at that 50,000 feet perspective at some of the teams that make up this conference and what really embodies the chaos that college football should represent. So we should have a really good one here as we rank all 16 teams, as well as give a little bit of an individual breakdown of all 16 teams of the Big 12 as we embark on the college football season. As we're recording this, we are about 40 days out, so we're extremely excited about that as well. But before we get started, just a couple of things of action. If you've been enjoying the 2025 preseason deep dive series, I need you guys to go ahead and do me a favor real quick. Hit that like button, as it not only does me a favor in terms of warming up my cold dead heart, what it also does as well is that it brings this video out to more college football fans like yourself. Truly would appreciate it. And if you love the content here on this channel, definitely make sure to hit that subscribe button as well, because I will say you have a real chance to be an OG. As we were recording this, we only had like maybe a dozen subscribers, if that. So with that being said, man, let's go ahead and jump right into the action, man. Let's take a look at what we have in terms of the Big 12 Conference. So as you guys already have seen alluded to, listen, the Big 12 season is already going to be shaping up to one of the more exhilarating chapters in this conference's story history, as it has shown ever since we saw some new teams added and some teams removed. Has legitimately become one of the more unpredictable power conferences in all of college football. We have now seen the full implementation of a 16-team lineup now that we have some of the border schools in Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. They are all in the fold from last season. They are, of course, back. So the Big 12 finding some stability, and the Big 12 will also have the distinct pleasure of starting the college football season off when we get that week number 0 on August 23rd, when Iowa State and Kansas State, they're both going to gather for the annual Farmageddon matchup, and that's going to be imported overseas. So between then and when the Big 12 Championship is actually played in Jerry's World on December 6th, we're going to see several plot twists and really several surprising and disappointing storylines develop as the season goes on, which makes this conference one of the more entertaining conferences in college football, even though it may not be the conference responsible for hoisting the national championship crown when it's all said and done. Perfect example of that is last year's champion in Arizona State. They return under Kenny Dillingham, and they are bolstered by the return of quarterback Sam Levin, for example, who has a very dynamic arm and one of the best playmakers in the entire country. And even though this was a team that had a heartbreaking loss to Texas, it was an outstanding season for Arizona State, who finished towards the bottom of the the Big 12 poll. They were expected to finish close to last, and they end up winning the whole thing. But we will see Arizona State certainly have some challengers worthy of the Big 12 championship crown, just such as Kansas State, with the steady and veteran-laden squad that's there under Chris Kyman. I'm very high on Avery Johnson, one of the better quarterbacks in the Big 12 as well. And then you have other really good programs as well. Texas Tech, Iowa State, even in Utah under Kenny Whittingham, who's looking to bounce back as well after missing a bowl game last season without having really an offense to work with. But what really makes this conference especially compelling is something that we already talked about a little bit earlier. It seems like virtually every team is within striking distance, thanks to the transfer portal, and putting together like one or two strong recruiting classes would allow like a Big 12 team to suddenly be in the thick of a title hunt. So you want to talk about teams that could be maybe starting off at the bottom in terms of expectations, looking at certain teams like a UCF, Cincinnati, Houston, or even in Oklahoma State under the direction of Mike Gundy. Those are all, oh, and of course Colorado and West Virginia, they're all in the bottom half of the FanDuel odds to win this conference, and they could all also legitimately go on a run should those teams reach their full potential and even catch a break or two along the way. That's how chaotic this conference truly is. So that's just something to think about when you hear these rankings. I wouldn't be surprised if you got like a Scrabble machine and like you flip the order, you would be just as better served, right? But the national perception of this conference, once again, I think it is going to be prepared and shaped by how these teams end up playing, at least right out of the gate in August and September, just because you do see several Big 12 teams have some somewhat difficult non-conference challenges that could define seasons for certain programs, whether it's Cincinnati going to play Nebraska in a neutral site game in Kansas City, Oklahoma is going to go on the road to play against Oregon, Baylor is also going to be hosting Auburn, so that should be exciting, and then of course Baylor at SMU as well. So games that will either boost potentials and boost that resume that could come into play if there's a Big 12 team that should be in the conversation to get a college football playoff spot, or maybe expose some early season weaknesses where some of those question marks truly do become concerns. So with that being said, in a league where parity reigns and multiple teams present themselves as some clear favorites, such as the Texas Techs and the Iowa States, Kansas States, Arizona States of the world, every game truly matters in this conference. There is certainly no guaranteed layup, so it should provide some intense competition, national relevance, and a thrilling run to Jerry World when we get around that December time frame, likely deciding who is at least the Big 12 representative, if not multiple bids represent this conference at the end of the year, which I do think the Big 12 can get multiple bids in a year. I think that's something that truly can happen, but let's go ahead and not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and jump right into what we have in regards to our full Big 12 rankings. As for the other conference breakdowns that we have done so far here on the channel, we always like to go ahead and start at the bottom like Drake does and work our way up to the top. So we will start with our 16th ranked team, and a team that I think is going to finish last in the Big 12 this year, the Arizona Wildcats. I understand that last year was the first year under new head coach Brent Brennan, who came in from San Jose State, but after what happened in that first season, you have to think that the pressure is already starting to mount. And if I think things are going to go how I think they're going to go, I think there is a world in which we see Brent Brennan possibly be on the hot seat by the time this season is possibly over. They do have Noah Fifita back, but even with Noah Fifita coming back, are we going to see more of that 2023 Noah Fifita that was able to propel Arizona to an extremely successful season in the Pac-12? Or are we going to see more of that 24 Noah Fifita who, kind of took a step back in terms of his seasonal statistics, right? There is a world in which we think it's going to be more of the latter, where we are going to see more of last year's Noah Fifita than the one that we saw in 2023. And that is because they have to figure out how to, one, replace the production of first-round pick Ted McMillan, who's now a member of the Carolina Panthers, and then not only that, you do have some major question marks on both lines of scrimmage. I have this team as a 3-9 team out the gate, and I don't even think that's guaranteed because, yes, they do have Oklahoma State at home, but I think Oklahoma State could be at least a slightly better outfit. We'll talk about more about them a little bit later, but there is a world where they dropped that game to Oklahoma State, even though I did give Arizona to win in my particular predictions. So I have them as a 3-9 team with the possibility of the floor being even lower, being that 2-10 squad. Speaking of teams that are going to try to find their aura once again, we do have the UCF Knights coming up next at number 15. Scott Frost is back with his second act with UCF, really helping them get from the bottom and really setting that foundation to eventually help UCF earn a bid from the American Conference and getting a Power 4 invite back into the Big 12. Listen, but college football is a little bit more of a different environment, and I think it's what we saw from his time in Nebraska is that he hasn't fully adapted to the new world of college football that we currently live in, where the transfer portal and NIL is far more prevalent than maybe what high school development used to represent in high school recruiting. Though those things all still certainly matter, but this UCF team, at least in year number one of Scott Frost's second act, I don't think should have terribly high expectations at the very least, because this is a team that is going to have several question marks that they're going to have to navigate with only 4 returning starters coming back from this UCF squad. Plus, there is currently a freeway quarterback battle that I would expect to go into the fall. I personally have no idea who is going to end up winning the UCF job. Following a couple of UCF fan accounts, I've heard multiple names thrown out there in terms of who could certainly be determined to be a favorite. So there's a lot to be determined out there. I do think because the schedule is pretty navigable for UCF, I do think at least there is a path where UCF can make a bowl game. But if they do make a bowl game, they're going to have to win all 4 of the following games at home. That includes a North Carolina game at home. We aren't fully sure what they are going to look like, especially very early on in the season. And then in conference play, you do have a West Virginia, Houston, and Oklahoma State as well. I think you do have to win all of those games, plus the North Carolina game, in order to make bowl eligibility possible. But realistically, I do think there is a shot that, hey, they're probably going to drop at least one of these games. So we have them barely missing a bowl game here at 5-7, but I certainly won't dismiss the fact that, hey, UCF could absolutely make a bowl game in year number 1, in spite of all the challenges that they have in Scott Frost's first year back in Orlando after failing at his alma mater. Now, we actually talked about Oklahoma State a little bit already in terms of some of the toss-up games in this bottom 4th of the conference, which is fitting that we have Oklahoma State next at number 14. And it's just really a matter of, can Mike Gundy get his program back on track after really what was a train wreck? This is a team that did start out 3-0. They started out ranked in the top 25. I believe they were a preseason top 25 team, and then the rails just completely fell off this program. I have no idea what happened. They lost 9 consecutive games. You know, I don't think even the biggest hater of Oklahoma State could sit here and tell you with any sincerity that that was an expectation to happen. You know, essentially not winning a single Big 12 game, and now you see an Oklahoma State program getting some new coordinators, both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball moving forward, plus an overhaul roster from the transfer portal. There is a reason that, you know, at the bare minimum, they should at least be better than what was displayed last year. But when you go and get players from the transfer portal, especially with the higher number of players that Oklahoma State had, at the same time, there is more variability with results. Ask what happened to Florida State last year. So I will lean that Oklahoma State should be better, and I don't even dismiss the fact that Oklahoma State, you know, could be in a bowl game when it's all said and done. But there's some games in that OK State schedule that are going to have to be won in order to make that happen, whether it is going on the road and playing against Arizona as well as UCF, who are ranked behind you in these rankings as you're representing the 14th ranked team in the Big 12. But then you also have Houston and Cincinnati as well. Those are 2 games that you also need to figure out how to win. Those 2 games, as well as Houston and Cincinnati, both are looking to be improved teams going into the 2025 campaign. So there's also a slight world where, you know, they drop all of those games I just mentioned and they're actually worse than last year, and then it creates some very uncomfortable conversations in Stillwater in terms of, should Mike Gundy retire and step down as a head coach of Oklahoma State, that there is a world where that could genuinely happen. But again, it's the Big 12. You never know what can happen. However, speaking of take-twos that are happening in this conference, we do have West Virginia bringing back its head coach after he was coaching the program in the late 2000s before he departed from Michigan, as that is the West Virginia Mountaineers. They come in as the 13th ranked team in my Big 12 preseason predictions. Listen, take two of Rich Rodriguez does officially come back, but how much should we really expect out of West Virginia here in year number 2? This is a roster that is going through a substantial transition period. They are welcoming almost 75% of the roster is new faces compared to last year's roster, which I know that West Virginia did make a bowl game, so it's not the worst thing in the world. But when you have all of those new faces, it naturally creates its fair share of questions, which is why I'm kind of in a holding pattern of wait and see for Rich Rodriguez. His strategy worked at the G5, but not everything that you can do in the G5 does always work at the power conference level. Neil Brown, for example, was a very successful coach at Troy before going to West Virginia, and he couldn't replicate his Troy success in Morgantown. I do have them at least ranked top 60 nationally. The first team, frankly, outside of Arizona that I have in my Big 12 that I don't really expect a bowl game for West Virginia. I think if they do hit that 6-6 benchmark, that should be seen as a tremendously successful season for the Mountaineers. And that is because for Big 12 standards, this is going to be a little bit more difficult of a schedule. Plus, you do have Pitt in the backyard brawl. You know, Pitt looking like a team that, you know, if they can replicate what they did in the first half of the year, that could be an improved team from what ultimately was a 6-7, or not 6-7, 7-6 campaign for Pitt. So again, another team that I think could go 3-9, maybe flirt with bowl eligibility if they can find a way to beat Pitt, beat UCF on the road, as well as the Colorado Buffaloes, who we will touch on a little bit more later. But I think 5-7 would be a pretty good year for West Virginia personally, and there's a chance that they could even step backwards, go 2-10, and have a little bit of a disaster as Rick Rodriguez kind of adjusts to being in the power conference ranks once again in this new era of college football. That could certainly happen. However, speaking of some of those transitions there are always coaches that are having a hard time making those transitions. That does lead me to my 12th team that I have in the Cincinnati Bearcats. And I want to create this caveat real fast. I'm saying this as a Cincinnati Bearcats fan. And I have family that goes to Cincinnati. But man, I just don't know if Scott Satterfield is the guy. I personally believe that this is someone that is going to need to make a bowl game here in year number 3. But I just don't know if that happens with this particular team. I know that Brandon Sorsby is coming back, and Brandon Sorsby is a very nice piece to have. I will admit that he, showed some really good moments last year at times, but there are some key gaps at receiver, defensive back, and then certainly certain portions of the offensive line and how fast can they mesh up as well. All of those factors that I mentioned could hold this team back in 2025. Plus, I don't know if Scott Satterfield is built to build a team that is capable of consistently competing at the power conference level. I would hope to be wrong, and I'll be excited if they are wrong, if I am wrong, because if I'm wrong, that means I get to celebrate my favorite team going to a bowl game. But I see my Cincinnati Bearcats being more of that 4-5 team win range, where similar to where they were last year. I think there's a shot that they can pull a win off at the road against Oklahoma State, but I just have a difficult time seeing them win more than 6 games and getting that bowl invitation invite. Although, unlike the other teams that I have behind Cincinnati, I don't think there's a scenario where there would be a disaster class type of season either. I don't at least expect that. However, speaking of former American Conference teams, the next one that I certainly want to talk about is the Houston Cougars, who come in at number 11, but they couldn't sneak up and surprise some people at that number 11 spot because this is a team that did have quietly one of the better defenses in the conference as they gave up less than 23 points a game. The offense was why Houston struggled mightily at times during the season, but because they did add Texas A&M transfer Connor Ligman, who does have experience starting at the power conference level, particularly in the grind of the SEC, and he's there to help overhaul his offense. Houston can definitely come up and surprise those people, and it's not that tough of a schedule to navigate. So that the schedule is on their side a little bit more, as I don't have them ranked much higher than Cincinnati. Houston's my 56th ranked team, and Cincinnati's my 57th. But unlike the Cincinnati Bearcats, I do have Houston going to a bowl game, but possibly getting a little bit higher into that 8-4 echelon if they can win some of these key games, including beating Colorado at home and then going on the road, beating UCF and Oklahoma State in conference play, as well as that non-conference matchup that they have against Oregon State as well, which I do believe is a toss-up. So I lean Houston actually making it to a bowl game this year, with the upside being a little bit higher than that at 8-4. Although there is a world where the opposite happens. Maybe Connor Lingman can't get this offense to click, and then Houston is right back where they started with that 4-8 overall record as well. That could happen too, but I'm actually pretty bullish on the Houston Cougars this year. Now, moving on into the top 10, we now have the Colorado Buffaloes coming in at number 10, as this was a team that lost quite a bit of high-end talent, right? This is a team that was close to winning the going to the Big 12 championship game in year number 2 under prime time Sanders, but now his son is off in the NFL, and so is the Heisman Trophy winner in Travis Hunter, replacing the production of both of those guys, especially when Travis Hunter was able to do what he did on both sides of the ball. That's going to be extremely challenging. Now, it's not going to be completely hopeless for Coach Prime, as he does bring in the Liberty transfer Keaton Salter to help compete with the blue chip freshman Julian Lewis to provide at least quality options at the quarterback position. But it just felt like at times, Colorado was carried a little bit more by their high-end talent. And now that high-end is talent, you question how can Coach Prime replicate the success of last year. So I'm actually a lot lower on Colorado than a lot of other people. Plus, the schedule isn't that great, as they do also face like a Georgia Tech, for example, in non-conference play. So the non-conference outside of their Delaware matchup actually could provide some challenges and headaches. I think Colorado could go 3-9, although I don't rule out them going to a bowl game as well. They'll have to beat Houston, they'll have to beat West Virginia, and also make sure that BYU and Iowa State also gets taken care of as well. But I actually have all of those games that I consider to be toss-ups to actually be games that Colorado loses. So it could be an ugly year for year number 3 under Coach Prime. And at that point, do you ring the alarm bell at that point, because they haven't really embraced high school recruiting? They have gone essentially all transfer portal and trying to get, it's just harder to create a culture when you're bringing in mercenaries all the time versus bringing in homegrown talent, right? That's just the nature of the beast sometimes. We'll see if I'm wrong on this one, but that's what they play the games, right? But we'll go ahead and move on to number 9 on my list, which is the Kansas Jayhawks. Kansas, on the other hand, I think should be a solid team this year. I know last year was a disappointment, but they did finish strong towards the end of the year, such as pulling that upset off against Colorado, play a little bit spoiler towards the end. Really, the biggest question is, can Jalen Daniels just remain healthy for the whole year? Jalen Daniels was, he was dealing with some things last year, and, that kind of limited him as a player. And then the rest of the year unfolded around him as those injury issues did start to arise. Listen, if he can remain healthy, I think there's a chance that Lance Leipold, his team, could have a solid bounce back year because when we saw him healthy, we know that he's an incredibly talented football player, but this is also someone that has been injury prone during his college career. We'll see if he can reverse that trend, but I like Lance Leopold as a coach still. I think he's a very solid player and a solid coach, understands what Kansas football is all about. So for Kansas, I'm certainly much higher on them, being that type of team that goes in that 7 to 8 win range. Should be a good year, should be a solid year for Kansas. Certainly can't complain about them. Now we start to go ahead and jump into the upper echelon of the Big 12. We've made it through half of the teams in the Big 12, but now let's go ahead and jump into that upper half of the Big 12. And I start with my 8th ranked team, the BYU Cougars, who I actually did have to bump down a few national ranking points just because of the situation with Jake Redsoff, because he is no longer with the team due to what came out with a sexual assault allegation that did get settled out of court. But because of that sexual assault allegation, he did break the honor code that is in place at BYU. So that's why he left. Not only left the program, but he left BYU completely. He's no longer there at the university. So not sure what Kalani Sitake is going to do at the quarterback position. There is multiple viable options that he can try to turn into, but what was going to be a battle of who's going to be that QB2 and be the heir apparent to Jake Redsock, because he was a senior anyways, you now get into that QB2 battle turning into a QB1. And while I don't think that one person makes up a team, and you'll see the record prediction that I have for BYU, I look at this BYU Cougar squad and I think to myself, okay, I still think that this is going to be a good team, but you see a team where, maybe the ceiling is a little bit lower and the floor is a little bit lower, even though maybe the overall record for BYU might be a little bit on the similar side of things. So I still have them as a 10-2 team. I still think they're going to be really good and surprise some people in light of the Jake Redsoff situation. I think that's, a program that does have some good culture out there. But I do think the floor is a little bit lower now with Jake Redsoff also not being a part of his program anymore. I think there's a world they do go 7-5, lose some toss-up games, such as, losing to Colorado, as well as losing to both Utah and TCU, who they do have the benefit of playing at home. The Holy War matchup at home is going to be really interesting. So, BYU is going to be a fascinating team. They are going to have to figure out how to rebuild both lines of scrimmage as well. They do have probably one of the more dynamic linebacker units in this conference, though, because Isaiah Glasker and Jack Kelly do come back. So there's still some really good pieces that are in place. The Jake Redsoff news push that over to the side. It's just we might see the floor of this team a little bit lower, even though maybe my overall prediction of him on the team or not would probably be similar, but the worst case scenario is certainly a little worse. Now, moving on to number 7, I do have a team that we kind of talked about earlier in terms of last little toss-up is TCU Horned Frogs. Josh Hoover's back to lead the way for an extremely dangerous offensive unit. Meanwhile, there might be some optimism surrounding the defense side of the ball because they have Andy Avalos continuing to implement his system. He's entering his second year, so we could see some growth on the defensive side of the ball. Here's the one caveat for TCU, though. I think TCU has one of the more daring schedules in this entire conference. This is a team where, one of the more volatile teams in this entire conference where you could either see TCU push for a Big 12 championship or a college football playoff bid, or you could see TCU miss a bowl game completely. I mean, there is a large variety of outcomes with TCU because they do have one of the more difficult schedules in the Big 12. You don't know what's going to happen when you go on the road to take on North Carolina in what is going to be a standalone game on a Monday night in week number 1. You also play SMU in your non-conference as well. The Battle of the Iron Skillet is going to be a hotly contested one. You're bringing a college football playoff team from last season into your building. Plus, even talking about the conference slate, Baylor and Iowa State, you have to play them at home, go on the road to take on BYU as well. BYU, one of the more underrated stadiums in the entire conference. So, listen, I think TCU would probably be in right about the middle and be like an 8-4 type team, but there's a world in which they could actually miss a bowl game, or they can make the college football playoff. Who knows what we see? I still think this is going to be a good team, though. Up next, and coming in at number 6, though, we do have the Iowa State Cyclones. They are coming off of a school record in terms of most wins in a single season, with 11 wins, culminating in an extremely exciting Pop-Tarts Bowl performance against Miami. And this 2025 team, there's quite a bit to like about this squad, right? They have a really good head coach in Matt Campbell, who returns a solid core of players that actually did compete in the Big 12 title game last year, and he'll also have some noticeable stars like Rocco Beck, obviously, and Dominic Orange as well leading the way in what should be another successful year in Ames, where they should once again be in that hunt to win the Big 12 championship. So with this Iowa State team, I do think that this is a team that could certainly be in a hunt and possibly be a CFP team like they almost were last year. But I think we're going to split the difference between what the best case and worst case scenario is going to be for Iowa State. Seeing that they do have Iowa at home, that should be a good Cy-Hawk Trophy battle. And then on top of that, you do have Arizona State at home as well, which I think is certainly a winnable game for the Cyclones, topping that off with road games against Colorado and TCU that could provide some challenges, particularly when you do lose multiple playmakers to the NFL. Meanwhile, coming in for the top 5, we're now getting into the the top contenders, and you'll notice for number 5, I am actually going to put the Utah Utes here because I truly believe this Utah Utes team, who comes as my 5th ranked team in my Big 12 power rankings, I think they're going to be one of the more improved teams in 2025. Coach Whittingham, we always know that he's going to be a defensive-oriented program. I think they'll have a strong defense once again, but they are going to have a pretty good facelift in terms of who they add on the opposite side of the ball as well when it comes to adding offensive coordinator Jason Beck, plus getting the quarterback out of New Mexico and Devon Dampier. This is a team that did struggle offensively last year, and because they did make those adjustments on the offensive side of the ball, I think that this team could have a much better 2025, being another team that, when we're all said and done, it wouldn't fully shock me if they were not competing for if they were out there competing for a CFP bid, being in that best case, being an 11-1, and even with the worst case scenario, I still think that there is some improvement with this Utah team where, at the bare minimum, they do at least make a bowl game. But again, another one of those teams where I think we're going to shake with the middle at 8-4. They do have a fair number of toss-up games that they're going to have to navigate primarily in conference play, whether it is playing Texas Tech, Arizona State, Kansas State, all at home, not to mention BYU and Kansas are also going to be games that you'll be playing on the road as well. So a interesting schedule for Utah here as they move into their second year in their Big 12 tenure, one that I think there is a chance that we see Utah having a better Big 12 schedule than what they had last year. But you want to talk about one of the biggest dark horses in the entire Big 12. That is going to be your Baylor Bears, though, who finished last season on an incredibly high note. Plus, the home schedule that they are going to be working with is gonna help this team out in terms of being that dark horse contender in the Big 12, which is why I do have this Baylor team as the number 4 team in the Big 12 conference. And listen to some of these notable home games that they have: Auburn, Arizona State, and Kansas State. having all of those games at home can certainly be helpful, particularly that first game against Auburn when you are trying to build that resume early in non-conference play, and there isn't a lot of data points between conferences because of how most teams decide to schedule this part of their schedule. So getting a win against Auburn early can really help this Baylor program. And then Arizona State and Kansas State, they're going to be two of my top 3 teams, obviously, because I haven't mentioned either of them yet. So having both of them at home when you got to play them anyways, that certainly doesn't hurt either. They do have Sawyer Robinson coming back, who's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. But how much the ceiling grows is going to really depend on the defensive side of the ball. I don't know how much the defense grows, which is why I do have Baylor at the same record that they were last year, ironically, that 8-4 area. But if that defense can show substantial growth, this is another one of those teams that we could actually see in the Big 12 championship realistically, finishing 11-1 and being in that conversation for a CFP bid, regardless of whether they win the Big 12 championship or not. I think it's going to be more of an 8-4 team, like I mentioned, but definitely a lot of potential here for sure. Speaking of teams that do have plenty of potential, as we now get firmly into the top 25 within my Big 12, we got Texas Tech as my 3rd best team in the conference, coming in as the number 22nd ranked team in the nation in terms of my preseason power rankings. Listen, is the significant allocation of resources towards the transfer portal finally going to help in terms of providing results? They did bring in the defensive coordinator out of Houston, Sean Wood, who I thought is going to be a pretty good hire, as that defense did struggle over the course of last year. But even though I think this team is extremely talented, the schedule gods were not too terribly kind to Texas Tech this year, having to go play like a Kansas State or an Arizona State on the road. It's not, you don't love to see it. So I do have them going 9-3, and also they have to play against Utah on the road as well. Utah having one of the more exciting environments in this conference. So some difficult games that Texas Tech is going to have to navigate. They do obviously have Braden Morton coming back and playing quarterback. He'll be an exciting watch, and a team that is certainly capable of winning double-digit games as well. But that schedule could be what holds this team back, ironically, and that's just kind of the luck of the die, considering we live in an era where in the Super Conference era, it is, I would argue it's easier for a team to go undefeated than maybe what it was 5 to 10 years ago, because it is a type of Super Conference where it's easier to duck some of the more quality teams in your conference until conference championship weekend. Texas Tech just did not get that benefit of the doubt this year. So I think this is a really good football team, but that's why I only have their upside at 10-2 versus, the Iowa States, Utah, and Baylor, and even like TCU, you can almost lump to that conversation as well, not having as high of an upside as those 3 teams that are behind Texas Tech, because they do have one of the more difficult schedules in the conference once you get into conference play, of course. Now we get into the top 2, and there's not really much left to talk about here. That's the Kansas State Wildcats. This could blow up in my face in terms of how the Big 12 operates, because you truly never know. But taking a look at this team on paper, I really like the team that Chris Klieman has assembled. I think they're going to be one of the favorites to win this conference when it's all said and done. Avery Johnson and Dylan Edwards are back, and they're going to make up one of the most dynamic backfields in the entire Big 12. Plus, they have a pretty strong defensive unit anchored by a strong defensive line, as well as a secondary that could get better as the season progresses as well. So Kansas State, I think, is one of those teams where you look at their schedule too, you look at it, and honestly, I look at Kansas State's schedule, And I think they're going to be favored in every single game that they play in this year. And I think that they do have that real potential to finish undefeated and lock up one of the CFP bids when it's all said and done. Now, they do play Baylor and Utah on the road, and those are certainly losable games for Kansas State. But even the worst case scenario at 10-2, I really love the over in particular for Kansas State. Again, it's the Big 12 Conference, so this could blow up in my face, but that's an exceptionally talented team out there in Manhattan. And I think Kansas State is going to be playing for a Big 12 championship at the end of the year, which leads me to the team that I think, ironically, is going to win the entire Big 12, and that is Arizona State. They were the biggest surprise in this conference last year, but make no mistake, Kenny Dillingham's boys are going to try to prove that what happened last year was certainly not a fluke. Led by Sam Levitt and an underrated defense. Everyone talks about Sam Levitt and particularly Cam Scatteraboo, who is now a member of the New York Giants. He moved on to the NFL. Not a lot of people were talking about that defense, and that defense that's actually a pretty good unit, and they've returned a fair number of guys as well. So I expect this team to have some deeper aspirations to try to make a deeper run in the CFP after getting bounced in the quarterfinals. Honestly, should have won that game against Texas, but unfortunately just couldn't make enough plays down the stretch to make that happen. Another team that I honestly believe could go undefeated given how their non-conference schedule is, and then even in conference play, I think they're going to be a favorite in every single game that they play in, but there's more landmines. I will caution for Arizona State fans, there's more landmines than there is possibly for Kansas State, where not only you have those road games against Baylor and Utah on the road, but you also have Iowa State on the road. I mean, Rocco Beck and Matt Campbell, you're certainly going to be ready in their home building. That's not going to be an easy win to attain on the road. I think they can do it, and I think they should be favored in that particular matchup as well, but it's certainly another landmine in that schedule that could see Arizona State actually regress from last year, maybe to that 9-3 threshold if everything goes wrong. But I still think Arizona State should have a really good year. How good that year is going to be depending on how they perform in those key games, like in the Baylor, Utah, and Iowa State matchup, which is going to wrap up our Big 12 Conference preview as part of the 2025 preseason deep dive series. Let me know down in the comment sections what teams do I have too high, as well as what teams do I have too low, as well as maybe a little snippet of, hey, what conference would you like to see me break down in the future? I do have a set schedule, but I can easily be persuaded if there is enough positive comments in terms of, getting this conference, like the next conference revealed. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. If you enjoyed this Big 12 breakdown, please do me a couple of more favors, man, before you head out. Make sure you hit that like button, as that helps get this video out to more passionate college football fans like yourself. Plus, you have a real opportunity to be an OG of the channel, and to do so, just hit that little subscribe button there in the lower right hand corner. Would really mean the world to me. But with that being said, I'm your host Jake of College Football Red Zone, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care, everybody.